Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Capitol Report. I'm your host, Steve Lance. Here's a look at some of the stories we've been covering for you today. Omicron is starting to surface throughout the United States, and the White House says there will be more, but what remains to be seen is just how dangerous this new variant might be. And the Supreme Court has heard arguments that will determine the trajectory of abortion throughout the nation. We speak to two female members of Congress to get their take. President Biden unveils his plan to combat the CCP virus this winter. At the heart of the program, vaccines, boosters, and testing. The White House expects another wave of rising COVID-19 cases this winter. President Biden has unveiled his plan.
We're expanding our national booster campaign to provide booster shots to all eligible adults.
If you're vaccinated, expect calls from your pharmacy for a reminder to get a booster shot.
Pharmacies will send millions of texts and emails to remind their customers to return for the booster shots because they know who got the booster shot at CVC.
That was one out of several points that the president made on Thursday. He also plans to set up more family vaccination clinics to inoculate children. Vaccinating and testing are at the heart of Biden's winter plan. Biden says that by next month, at-home test kits will be free to pick up at designated sites. He will require private insurance plans to cover the costs of the at-home test kits. However, it is still too early to tell the virulence or the lethality of the new Omicron variant. The Minnesota Department of Health has announced that a fully vaccinated man has tested positive for the Omicron variant of the CCP virus. He recently traveled to New York City. Health officials confirmed 6 cases of the Omicron variant in Nebraska. Additional cases of Omicron have been detected in at least 6 U.S. states, including California, Colorado, Hawaii, and New York. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki briefed reporters.
So we do anticipate there will be more cases, and we know that will be the case.
Most of these patients were fully vaccinated and developed mild symptoms. During an historical hearing on Wednesday, the Supreme Court signaled that they are willing to uphold abortion limits in a Mississippi case which would be effectively turning back Roe v. Wade. The Supreme Court had their first hearing on the argument of the Mississippi law that would ban almost all abortions after 15 weeks of pregnancy. All 6 conservative justices, including 3 appointed by former President Donald Trump, indicated that they would uphold Mississippi's law.
The Supreme Court wouldn't have taken the case if they weren't going to do something significant. You've got a solid majority of 5 justices there that want something dramatically different than Roe, that believe Roe was whole made-up cloth of a new constitutional right that wasn't there, and they're ready to overturn it.
Ambassador Brownback believes that the court will send the authority back to the states.
So Kansas would probably ban abortion. California will leave it in place, but you leave it to the states and the people to decide.
According to reports, both Democratic and Republican lawmakers believe that the Supreme Court should not have the final say when it comes to getting an abortion. Experts estimate that if the court rules conservatively, nearly half of the country could start passing laws to ban abortions.
I really think the tide is turning in this country, and I think a lot of people all around the world know inherently that these are our children, these are our offspring, and so I do think there is momentum.
The court will be back in session on Monday morning, but the official decision isn't expected to be handed down until the spring. When it comes to the issue of abortion, it is a deeply personal one for Florida Congresswoman CAMMACK. With a landmark abortion case before the Supreme Court this week, we had a chance to speak with Representative CAMMACK about what this means to her on a personal level and the greater implications. Here's part of our interview. Representative CAMMACK, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, Congresswoman, yesterday there was a landmark case in front of the Supreme Court.
Yes.
That could potentially reverse Roe versus Wade, have long-lasting implications on abortion. I want your opinion on that case. What's your take?
Well, obviously this issue is pretty personal to me. You know, I've shared before that I'm actually not even supposed to be here. My mom, when she was 27 years old, she suffered a stroke while she was pregnant with my sister, and was told then that she would never be able to have kids safely again. So years go by and she finds herself pregnant with me, and alone, and it was a very scary time for her. And the doctors told her then, you're not going to be able to carry this baby to term. It'll certainly die, and it'll probably kill you in the process. And so that obviously scared her. When she told her family eventually, they also encouraged her, you need to abort this child because you won't survive, the child won't survive. And against all odds, no support from family, she chose life. And she delivered an 8-pound, 6-ounce healthy baby girl. So this issue is really personal to me. And I tell people all the time that it's an emotionally charged issue, but how can we as Americans say that we uphold the very tenet, the very basic foundation of our country of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness if we can't advocate and protect life? And I think the science has caught up. Roe v. Wade came in a time when the science wasn't reflective of the fact that life begins at conception. And so today we know that to be true. And we know that the child in the womb can feel pain. We have science on our side. And I think when you talk about this issue, it is about empowerment. It is about speaking up and protecting those most vulnerable.
Now, Congresswoman, a lot of people get their news from the headlines. When it comes to Roe versus Wade, they think that abortion is just going to be wiped off the map completely in the country. Yeah. What is your interpretation of what could potentially happen?
Well, what we're seeing with this Dobbs v. Jackson case, it's really about upholding a couple of things. It's upholding the science about viability. This is the Mississippi case, and again, 10th Amendment, the state of Mississippi is asking for the Supreme Court to uphold their right as a state to ban abortions after 15 weeks. And I don't think that is unreasonable. We know, again, going back to the science about the viability, we know more about the development, and we know that life begins at conception. So the Mississippi case still allows for the exceptions of the mother's health, of incest and rape. And I think that's important to note because you hit on it. The headline will read that this is going to obliterate Roe v. Wade and women will be, seeking out dangerous abortion alternatives in dark alleys somewhere. And that's not the case at all. No one's advocating for that. But in this hyper-political environment that we're living in, I think it's dangerous when people read the headline, but then not the full story.
Now, your personal story, your mom's personal story was quite powerful. Is there anything else that you would like to add or say to those who think that, by eliminating abortion after 15 weeks or just the abortion issue in general is an attack on women's rights?
No, I think that today there's so many options and women have so many different organizations that provide support. There's not a singular black or white option here of just abortion is the answer. And I know that for my mom, when in 1988 she was faced with this very, very difficult situation, she looked around and there weren't a whole lot of resources. Today, that's not the case. So for women who are finding themselves in this very difficult situation, know that there is an army of fellow women and advocates out there that can help you through this, and that there are resources available, and that it doesn't mean that Roe v. Wade and the change of what comes when Dobbs v. Jackson is successful, that doesn't mean that that's an attack on women's health. Abortion is not women's health. It is not reproductive health. It is the harming of two individuals, one who ultimately is murdered in the process, and the lasting effects of what it happens to that woman who had to undergo that. That is not women's health. So there are alternatives and there is a path forward. There is light at the end of the tunnel.
Representative CAMMACK, thank you.
Thank you.
The national Christmas tree lighting took place outside of the White House last night. The tree lighting ceremony included a cast of stars, but was without a public audience. The event will be broadcast on TV this Sunday, and the tree will be open for viewing starting from tomorrow until January 1st. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal and Republican Senator Pat Toomey introduced a bill to increase food donations on Tuesday. It aims to eliminate legal roadblocks that discourage food donations by restaurants, retailers, schools, and others. The Food Donation Improvement Act would provide liability protections to organizations so that they can donate food directly to people in need rather than going through a nonprofit. Blumenthal said in a statement that nearly 40% of our nation's food goes to waste, creating a clear opportunity and imperative to help Americans going hungry every day. According to the nonprofit Feeding America, about 42 million people were expected to experience challenges of finding or affording food this year. The chief spokesperson for Vice President Kamala Harris has resigned from her post. On Wednesday, Simone Sanders sent a letter to her colleagues saying that she would leave the White House at the end of the year.
I love Simone. And I can't wait to see what she will do next. And I know that it's been it's been 3 years of a lot of jumping on and off planes and going around the country, and she works very hard, and I can't wait to see what she'll do next.
Harris was asked about the resignation but declined to answer if she views Sanders' departure as a broader staff shakeup within her office. 2 weeks ago, Harris's communication director also resigned. And according to Fox News, 2 other communications staffers are expected to leave Harris's team in the coming weeks. And coming up, Congresswoman Lisa Mclean has introduced a bill to protect veterans' civil rights. She also weighs in on the landmark abortion case that was just recently heard by the Supreme Court earlier this week. And members of Congress on Capitol Hill are working to teach young people the truth about communism. They tell us why they see this as a bigger threat now more than ever. And President Biden tightens restrictions on travelers as Omicron cases start to pop up across the United States. 80 House Republicans voted with Democrats on Tuesday to pass the Immunization Infrastructure Modernization Act for a federally funded vaccination database. The bill will now move to the Senate for a vote. The bill seeks to allocate $400 million of taxpayer money toward a database that will track and record vaccinations according to geographic areas. The database will also expand the capabilities of the CDC to share health data with the federal government. Representative Byron Donalds of Florida, who voted no on the bill, said that the legislation encroaches upon the fundamental right to medical privacy. And meanwhile, Representative Mary Miller said that the legislation would enable the federal government to force Americans to comply with a global vaccination vision. We had a chance to speak with Congresswoman Lisa Mclean on the issue of abortion, which has been dominating the headlines this week in the wake of the possibility of the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Representative Mclean is also on the Armed Services Committee, and she just introduced a bill to protect veterans from losing their benefits if they refuse to take the COVID-19 vaccine. Here's some of what the Congresswoman had to say.
Congresswoman Lisa Mclean, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Thank you for having me.
Now, this has been a huge week for the issue of abortion. And as a female member of Congress, I'd just like to get your take on the events that have taken place this week.
You know, I think for this week, the word that I want to use is persistence. We have a belief in life, and the members of our caucus and really the voices of all the Americans are continuing to be heard to fight for the lives of the unborn. And this is a very monumental time in our history. You know, I think we have some good indications from the courts right now, and I believe we're cautiously optimistic. And we just are coming off the Thanksgiving holiday, and I think right now we're just thankful to be in this position of truly perhaps a life-changing event, and not just a life-changing event, a multi-life-changing event. So I'm very encouraged.
Now, Congresswoman, I want to ask you, do you think that restricting abortions in any form is infringing upon women's rights? And what do you think that the science says about the issue of viability?
Well, first of all, I think if we're going to talk about the science, we really and truly need to talk about the science. And there's a science argument, and there's also a moral argument. And I believe in individual liberties, but when my individual liberties infringe upon another's individual liberties, then it's just not me that I'm talking about. And I made a conscious decision. And at some point in time, we have to own our actions and our choices. So, of course, I believe in women's rights. Of course, I believe in individual liberties. But when those liberties infringe on the lives of an unborn child, then it's not just me I'm talking about. And I think the science would show, as it pertains to viability, that at 15 weeks, 12 weeks even, there is a viable person there.
I just want to switch gears a little bit. You recently co-sponsored a bill with your colleague, Representative Brian Babin, and it's called the Our Veterans Earned It Act. Tell us a little bit about your bill.
Well, at the end of the day, our veterans make the ultimate sacrifice. They put their life on the line to defend our freedoms and our freedoms that we all enjoy on these shores. I want to make sure that we care as much about them while they're in the service, while they're not, as well as after their service. And what's critical about this is I want to make sure that there is no negative consequence to those people that gave the ultimate sacrifice and are in our service, that if they choose not to get the vaccine, that their benefits, of which they are entitled to because they've paid the dues, do not become decreased in any way, shape, or form.
I want to ask you, in Chicago, there was a pretty big win for the Chicago Police Department where they pushed back on Mayor Lori Lightfoot's mandate, and she's given up that fight. Do you see this, potentially happening on the federal level with things like your bill? Will there be enough resistance that it could have an impact on some of these federal mandates?
Absolutely. And that is why we are fighting so hard against the vaccine mandates. And I hate even calling it a vaccine because it's not. It does not eradicate COVID, right? Listen, I believe I've been vaccinated, but that is a choice that I've made between myself and my healthcare professional. And I believe what you're seeing is people's voices are beginning to get heard. And they're getting heard at the federal level. And we must continue to fight and continue our voices to be heard with the science. Remember, look at the frontline workers, the police officers, the healthcare professionals, all of those individuals. They were our heroes. Now they're our villains. I think what the American people want is just a little truth, transparency, and God, could we have just a little bit of consistency? We have natural immunity, we have testing, we have come so far and made so much progress with COVID. Why don't we celebrate that as opposed to fear-mongering?
Congresswoman Lisa Mclean, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
It may be harder to get a Christmas tree this year due to supply chain disruptions.
We're having shortages of everything, and just, of course, it had to get Christmas trees.
Clogged ports, a trucking shortage, and extreme weather have reduced supplies of both real and artificial Christmas trees. The Federal Reserve is reporting that many parts of the country were hit by supply chain bottlenecks and labor shortages throughout the month of November. However, they say the outlook for future growth still remains positive. According to a new survey by the Ronald Reagan Institute, a majority of Americans across the political spectrum now see China as the biggest threat to the United States, a dramatic change since 2018. A total of 64% of Republican respondents said that China is their top concern, followed by Democrats and independents at around 44%. The most dramatic change was shown within the Democrats, who changed their views about China in 2021. Previously, they thought that Russia was the largest threat. Also, nearly 3/4 of all respondents said that they believed that it was likely that the CCP virus accidentally leaked from a lab in Wuhan, China, and that Chinese authorities have lied about it. members of Congress introduced a bill to teach young people about communism. They're concerned that the lack of education on communism has led America's youth to support an ideology that they say is inherently evil. NTD's Melina Wisecup brings us more from Capitol Hill.
A group of Congress members expressing why they say the specter of communism is a bigger threat now than ever before, and how to overcome this threat. One Congress member says it's every single person's responsibility to take action.
It is now our responsibility. Nobody else, every single one of you, it's in your hands.
The Congress members are introducing a bill called the Crucial Communism Teaching Act, an effort to teach America's young people the legacy of communism.
Socialism is very appealing to young people. It's very utopian. It's this wonderful idea that we can all have what we want and it will just work, except it never works because it goes directly against human nature.
The threat of communism, the evil of communism, the inherent evil of communism.
An ideology that's led to countless deaths and ongoing persecutions against people of faith. The Chinese communist regime today still jailing, torturing, and killing Falun Dafa practitioners and Uyghurs.
My sister has been detained since September 2018. More than 3 years now, 3 years, 3 months. I have no idea where she is. The conscience of the world, conscience of the humanity is at test, and we will be failing it. So we must act.
The lead sponsor of this bill, Congresswoman Maria Salazar, comes from a family who fled communist Cuba. She tells us the young generation put Fidel Castro in power because they didn't understand the true nature of communism.
Very concerned that future generations, my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren, will say the same thing to us. You didn't teach us how bad this was, and unfortunately, socialism and communism is very pernicious. Once it's in, it's like a pit bull. It grabs you and is not going to let you go. It's an attack on the human fiber. It's an attack on humanity. It's evil. It's very evil. And being so evil, it only destroys the human soul and everything with it.
And Congressman Jacobs says Americans are more vulnerable to this threat now, as principles of faith and family are under attack.
Our faith has been rocked. People believing in God and going in church is weakened right now. Our family structures in a lot of places are weakened.
A 2020 poll reveals that 1 in 5 millennials views communism favorably. And there are even more, 1 in 3 from Generation Z, who buy into the ideology.
Do you think that was intentionally done? We've known that the Communist Party, especially in China, has been working on their own, generation after generation. They've been trying to instill these ideas. Do you think that this is kind of a subversive effort that's been going on for years in the U.S.? Why are young people not taught the truth of this?
It is a subversive effort. It started with the Soviets. The Soviets have been doing it for decades. There's a famous 1984 interview with Yuri Bezmenov that details the Soviet strategy, that 85% of their funding from the KGB didn't go to the cool spy stuff like you see in the Americans, right? It went to misinformation campaigns, using our own free society against us, using our divisions against us and perpetuating those. Frankly, I can't imagine they ever thought that they'd be as successful as they are. The Soviet Union is gone, but that legacy has lived on. Started with the radicalism of Marxist-infused radicalism in the 60s, up until the CRT radicalism of today. It's all from the same vein. And so presenting the facts of history to students, which probably they've just never heard, I think is an important first step in getting them off the socialism train.
And if this bill does pass through Congress, it will lead to a model curriculum being written and offered to schools that will teach the younger generation about the dangers of the communist ideology. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
The Biden administration is ramping up restrictions for travelers coming in and out of the United States. This is in what they say is an effort to curb the spread of the new variant that has been detected in the U.S. President Joe Biden announced the changes on Thursday, with actions coming in response to the threat of CCP virus variants, both the Delta and the recently emerging Omicron. International travelers coming into the United States will have to test for the CCP virus within 24 hours of departure, regardless of nationality or vaccination status. Travelers will also have to continue wearing masks through March 18th on domestic flights and public transportation. People who do not comply with the mask mandate could face up to $3,000 in fines. And with the midterm elections coming up, President Biden's plan to manage the pandemic has come under fire from Republicans, who say that these drastic measures will evolve into having more mail-in ballots, which will favor the Democrats in the upcoming midterms. And that's all we have for you on the Capitol Report today. Thank you for tuning in. I'm Steve Lance. Have a great weekend, and we'll see you next time.